Okay, so we are going to begin the Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting for Wednesday, December 11th. Since it's so crowded in here, I just want to remind everyone, please do not have conversation in the room. It's incredibly distracting and it makes it so the audio doesn't always pick up. So if you need to have conversation, please leave the room. If you would like to address the commission, I will recognize you and ask that you come up and speak clearly into the microphones. There should be no shouting, no questions coming from the audience. Okay. We have to get this recorded. So with that, we'll begin the public meeting, public comment on items not being heard today. Okay, so we'll move into the orders of conditions. We are here to discuss Sunset Beach Preservation Fund, 87 to 105 Baxter Road, SE 48 2824. We are discussing the site inspection, nourishment guidelines and conditions, and potential failure criteria. So we are going to start by having staff just describe their inspection report for us.
Sorry about that. That was the NCTV guy, so what I answer. So just to preface everyone for the special meeting, we have been receiving a significant number of citizen inquiries and also been getting reports on deliveries and had our regular inspection scheduled anyways to be out on the bluff. And during that inspection where and I detailed it in the report I sent out to everyone, we walked the length of the tops of the geotubes and then walked the length of the base of the geotubes as well, and saw a lot of pieces of debris and things like bricks and trash. I think the pictures detail it pretty clearly, and felt that it raised to the level of concern that it needed to at least come in front of the commission for discussion and review. And that's a really brief summary, but that's kind of what it was. And felt that there were questions about general condition number 7 specifically, that it met that criteria for clean fill, and wanted to let you guys have a review.
So I have to say, after getting Jeff's report last week and seeing the photos, I went out to the bluff myself. I was able to view from the top, and then I could walk the beach in front of the template. I couldn't walk the top of the template because they were actively working up there. My pictures are part of the packet, but I noticed debris of varying sizes throughout the entire template. So not concentrated in one spot, but really throughout. Large pieces of debris, what looked to be, round concrete. And then you could also see, big rocks and chunks of debris falling down the template as they were grooming it from the top. So that's what I saw out there. I don't know if any commissioners have questions for Jeff about his report, the general conditions. You guys.
No, it was very clear, I thought.
Right. Very.
Just the one question I have, are the photos, I know you said you walked the entire beach and the top, and the photos, did they pretty much cover all the different spots, or was there more like saturation in different spots?
Right, so I took those photos on the entire length, top to bottom, just to kind of cover the route that I usually take, is I usually access from the path that's down the bank that's there. It's not always accessible to everybody. And then I typically walk the top of the geotubes south towards Low Beach, and then go back north on the beach, and then finish off that last section back to the beginning of that trail. So those pictures kind of detail that. I will say, kind of note, and in full disclosure, the bank, and I know we've talked about this before, the bank, especially to the south where the residence used to be, does contribute construction materials and bricks and stone and things down the bank. And I think some of that material is probably what got distributed across the template as well, from what had come out of the bank, just from natural erosion that's there. But again, that's material that's, I think we were in question of whether it should be in the template. So, but we did observe that there are bricks and gravel and irrigation piping and things that do exit the bank, especially to the south. That's there. And I know it'll come up again. It is a shared delivery point for multiple projects. So we're also kind of concurrent to this, also reviewing the other projects that use that delivery point as well. But this one kind of was first on the list.
But does this pit deliver to other sites? Like to Pocono, the other projects we have going on?
So some of the sites that we've received the Sieve Analysis for, so whether it was the Spearhead location or the South Shore Road locations, those have only been filed with us by the applicant for their use. And I'm not aware of any other projects that are using that material, or no one else has sent that same analysis in for their projects.
Okay.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Now I will open it up to SBPS representatives.
Stephen Cohen for the applicant, or for the respondent. So I want to say again, as we said at the last meeting, that SBPF views itself as a responsible partner here and wants to take all actions to make sure that all sand is both compatible and clean. And we think that all of the activities that have taken place are in compliance with the orders. I know that despite social media campaigns to convince you otherwise, and perhaps even your own observations, you might think that that might not be the case, but it is. And I would suggest the following. One, that there's actually nothing that prohibits the activities that have been happening so far, and those activities happen essentially island-wide. Two, the pictures that we've been seeing are in fact, definitely not all from the SBPF site. They're from other sites, north and south. They're from other areas. Third, a lot of the debris that can be seen from the area actually comes from the bluff, from the top of the bluff, from former residentially developed sites. And thirdly, the debris moves up and down the course of the beach due to storms, due to wind, due to whatever. And so you can't just say, well, there's a brick here, and so therefore SBPF must have put it there. That said, it doesn't really matter how it got there, why it got there, or whatever. At the end of the day, we're all in agreement that there should be clean sand there. There should not be an overage of organics or clay or silt or fines, and there should not be, which would impact the percentage of sand that should be delivered, and there should not be any debris there. SBPF at the last meeting volunteered to come up with technical policies and compliance guidelines that so far have not existed for anybody in order to make sure that you can feel comfortable that the sand that's being put there is clean sand. Mr. Dunk has submitted those to Jeff this afternoon, and we have copies for you. You probably haven't seen them yet. And so we would be happy to comply with a voluntary program until the commission acts to adopt its own policies, which we assume would be then applicable to everybody. I also want to point out that essentially there's a significant difference in the way sand is used in sand mitigation today than there was 5 or 10 years ago. The market is just different. There are 3 commercial sand pits on Nantucket, but those don't operate in the same way they used to. So essentially all job site or all excavation sites on Nantucket are either used are reused sand. That sand, if it's not taken to our site, is taken to a different site, or is taken to one of the commercial facilities. So it's really just a matter of how it gets there and who it goes through, not whether or not it's going there. In other words, sand, if SBPF doesn't use this sand, a different contractor is going to use it, or it's going to go to the site where we're buying sand from. It doesn't just disappear, right? All that sand being excavated out is in the system. And that has essentially always been the case. All sand taken out of excavation sites goes to borrow pits. They're not quarries, they're borrow pits, meaning sand comes in and out. So the thing to do is to make sure that there are proper procedures in place, that the sand is properly screened, properly tested when needed, and properly has protocols to remove and prevent and remove debris, and protocols to make sure the sand isn't taken from an area where it might have contaminants like a septic system or an known environmental hazard or something like that. And so I think the protocols that Dwight can get into more details about demonstrate how we can do a better job on that. And we would suggest that you would adopt some version of that island-wide to make sure that everybody is also meeting those standards.
I guess I might have a question for you because it was my understanding of sediment transport that large things like boulders actually just fall out and essentially sit because they're too heavy and big for large
During
But I mean, for the volume and amount of large boulders in here, I'm sorry, there's just no way that they were all transported within a week's time from one point on the block.
Just in response to that, during large storms, severe storms, the wave energy can definitely move boulders.
So from one side of your template all the way to the far side.
I'm not saying in 1 week, but I'm saying that large storm events with high energy waves can certainly move boulders. So I mean, that's I'm not gonna say how far, how fast, but definitely they can move the boulders. We see that along the coast regularly.
I'm just wondering about the time frame.
Well,
here.
it like I say, it depends on the storm, depends on the length of the storm, the direction of the storm. So I mean, but if so that's. I just want to answer that kind of general question for you in terms of whether or not storms can move boulders, and the answer is yes. If I may, I don't want to cut you off, but I did. We received notice on Monday of this meeting, and with that, we, as Stephen mentioned, we were here last month, and based on that, we were going to prepare a draft protocol for sand, and the plan was to have it, for on the docket for next week at the regular scheduled meeting. So with that, I worked on the draft. It's still a draft, which I think is fine because that way it gives people time to review and discuss and refine it. I sent that over to Jeff today so that it's in the record, along with just a brief letter regarding Jeff's memo of his observations from last week.
Yeah. But before Dwight gets into what we think should be done, or what we're proposing to you should be done, I do want to say that the current process for taking sand out of a excavation site involves taking it out of the ground, generally putting it in a pile, then coming later and putting that into a truck, and then taking that truck going and dumping it at a holding facility where it's moved around, and then again, into piles, and then again put back into another truck, and then brought out to Baxter Road, and then put over the bluff. In that process, there are numerous points where debris can and is taken out. So it's not as if we're just like taking from a bucket, putting it in the truck, and dumping it over without anybody actively looking. So I can't guarantee you. In fact, I'm sure that there's debris that has gotten in there. But it's not as if no efforts have been made or there's no process in place that tries to screen out that debris. But we definitely agree it can be done better, and Dwight can walk you through some of the ideas that we're proposing.
Yeah, if you don't mind if I sit.
Could I just ask a question, actually? That's great that you guys could put together, this proposal, fairly quickly. But we've got all these issues about existing reports sand size, grain size, all of that. And I'm wondering kind of what order do we want to do that in? Because, this is, I guess I'm just, thinking, starting to talk about this new thing and asking questions about it is that's, to me, that's kind of over here as one thing to do. And what we're talking about are violations and the rest of it. So I was thinking we'd go there, but
Yeah, I mean, I was planning on starting with Jeff's report because it all does speak to the sediment analysis. If it was done correctly, we asked last week about chain of command of the sediment or last meeting, excuse me. And you said in some cases it does go directly from site to the bluff, and then in some cases it gets shuffled around. So it depends.
As far as I know, from the Sieve Analysis results from those sites that you have, that I have ushered through either to Peter Rosen, who does the analysis, and when he's unavailable, Alpha Analytical does the analysis. It's my understanding that generally that sand goes from the site to the sand lot, where it's all, as Stephen was mentioned, it goes from the source site to the sand lot and is stockpiled there until then it is trucked to the template. That's
the last
Yeah.
meeting, that was a little bit of a misstatement.
what I'm saying is that is my understanding of most of the sand. Now, there is the potential that the contractor may leave the sand on the source site and then bring it right to the bluff after the analysis is done, rather than that intermediate step. What I'm saying to you is generally it goes to the sand lot. Could there be some of those sites that it went right to the bluff after it doesn't go to the bluff until the Sieve analysis is done and it's been accepted as being determined to be compatible based on grain size.
I think that Jamie did say that at least on one occasion there was sand that didn't go to the holding site first, but that none of the sand went before the Sieve analysis was done.
Correct.
But it is but the protocols that we would have now would prevent anything from going that didn't have proper screening in the cases that require it at a different level than has been done so far, which Dwight can get into if you want him to.
Yeah.
So I want to establish whether or not you feel responsible for components that are neither compatible or clean that are on the template at the moment. Do you accept that you're responsible for that no matter how it got there? Because there seems to be a debate going on here, while the evidence of our own eyes show that clearly it's neither compatible nor clean.
So we do not, SBPF does not dispute that it is possible that some of the debris within the site was deposited through the sand, but we think that there's also other sources for it, either from the bluff itself or from other sites or from other contractors. And I couldn't
Thank
tell
you,
you.
Steve.
Yes.
So the other thing is that until the series of nor'easters
Yeah.
in March of 2018, basically this wasn't really an issue because what was being delivered looked very similar to what was on the beach, and this issue didn't come up. Post 2018, the material that's being delivered is very different in color from what it used to be. And then now we just recently have this issue with all the debris. So,
Well, the color is a different issue. The color has, and Dwight can get into more detail, but color might have to do with the amount of iron in there. It might have to do with the amount of fines. It might be that there's a slight amount of clay. I think you know that in a basic sense, there's a variation that's allowed that might change the color. That's still clean.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And although in Florida, for instance, compatibility includes color. There's I think it's called the Messner color scale. But but I just want to establish that there seems to have been a change in what's being delivered since April of 2018 or March, April of 2018. And then now suddenly we have this, well, I would call it a disaster. I don't know what you would call it. But I just wanted to establish that you do accept that you're responsible for what is on that template. And that if necessary, you'll remove it.
Right. Let me, if I may respond to that, it's a multiple part response.
Yeah.
I won't, I see many of you have the letter, so I sent it to Jeff, so I won't go through the whole letter. But item number 2 gets to part of what you're saying, Commissioner Golden. That when we examine what's going on out there, we see 3 sources of debris, non-natural material, that can get onto the template. As Jeff has mentioned, and in some of his pictures show, and as you all may have seen, you know, the lot at 85, 87, you know, where there were homes, there are PVC pipes, there's old gas pipes, there's wires, there's bricks, there's debris coming out. That is a known source. It comes down the bluff and it gets onto the ramp.
And irrigation too.
In irrigation tube, you know, we see sono tubes, you know, that's coming out of the eroding bluff. It gets down into the template because it gets onto the ramp. They've modified the work a little bit to have a turnaround so that when the equipment doesn't have to go down, then come back up, because when it comes back up, it can pull some of that stuff onto the template. That's a known source. Okay. Another potential source, likely source, is this is a publicly available and used ramp. As Steve mentioned, the sand market on Nantucket is basically reused sand from sites around the island. Talking with contractors and truckers on site, on the island, it's a known practice that this material is going from these sites and going to coastal projects around the island, not just SBPF. And I know I heard Jeff mentioning it as we walked in, but there have been 2 occasions when Jeff was out on the template. One was talked about last month's meeting back in June, when Jeff met out there with Mr. Feely, and there was a pile of sand that had debris in it that was deposited by another contractor for another project. Last week, the same thing happened when they went out and looked. There was a pile there that was at the 87, 85 site, you know, location, collection location before it's pushed down, that was deposited by another contractor for use at another project. Now that all goes down the same ramp. And then third is material that can come out of the recycled sand that SBPF uses. So we acknowledge that, you know, there are those 3 sources. And with that, I'd like to discuss are sand management, you know, operations to make sure that this doesn't, and actually, let me just step back. When the SBPF contractor is working, as Steve mentioned, when sand is collected from a site, debris and stuff that's in the sand is removed. When it goes to the sand lot and it's dumped, they see material, it's removed. As they're working the sand, it gets removed. So there's a definite practice to remove debris, to pick debris. When it gets dumped and starts to be spread, the equipment operators, I was out there today, there's a couple of buckets along the way, and the equipment operator keeps a bucket in his cab so that when they see stuff, they're picking it out. So there's an active program to remove stuff as it's seen.
When did you start that?
I would have to ask Mr. Feely when they started that, but it's been pretty common
If the material was coming out of that one source on the bank and getting spread throughout the template, that would suggest that debris is not.
Well, what I'm saying is when, you take a load and there can be stuff in the middle of the load that you don't see. I mean, I'm not saying that picking it is a perfect way of taking care of it, but what I'm getting at is there is active management to try to pick that material out along those different points.
Can I just respond to that? This is anecdotal evidence, just one time, but I was there in October and I saw 3 truckloads. None of the operators of the truck did the bucket picking out that you mentioned. That doesn't mean that nobody's doing it. I'll admit it was just one time, but there's 3 truckloads.
Well,
I did not see it.
When I was out there today, I can't tell you when they've started that, if it's been ongoing, if it's depends on but what I'm letting you know that's certainly the standard operating procedure now.
And let me just I've got another question, because when I read your letter this afternoon, it struck me in this paragraph number 2, you talk about that SBPF will remove exposed materials, and this will serve to remove SBF deposited sand. So I took that to mean, since you weren't saying has been, it's been our practice. When you say will remove, that to me means you're going to start to do that.
I'm sorry, I should have been clearer with my wording, meaning to remove the material that's in the bank, right? When you look at it and you see the pipes that are there, to go and cut those things off and remove them. So, because right now they're there and they fall down in there. And as they get down to the base, they might get, they can be removed. But the idea would be to go and actively cut pipes off, cut, those types of things out of the bank. That's why I'm saying to remove that out of the bank in the future.
Yep.
And so with that,
If I can just make an observation, that debris that coming out of the bank has always been there. And yet, it's never been an issue up until now. And so, that is why we, I think, are skeptical that is really much of a source of where this debris has come from.
I have not assigned percentages. I'm saying the three sources that I can identify, that I think we can identify.
I just want to
Okay.
make that point.
So with that, as we discussed last month's meeting, I proposed a protocol that, as Stephen mentioned, and as I've mentioned again, the use of recycled sand is ubiquitous on the island. And this actually might be a protocol for the commission to, review, massage and make a standard protocol for all coastal projects that require coastal nourishment. But this includes basically 2 parts. One, which was a big focus of the discussion last month, which is whether or not material is clean, free of contamination, and building upon or based upon the Beach Nourishment Guide. And remember, that Beach Nourishment Guide, when you read it, is really focused on using dredged materials for use on the beach, not upland sand for use on the bank. So there has to be, looking at that and using this framework, and then making it, modifying it a little bit to be used for land-based sand used on a bank or beach. So basically it calls for the due diligence, as we've talked about. What I've proposed is, for SBPF to use the EDR radius map review. That is a standard practice for environmental site assessment phase 1s. It's that review. It's a service. It's a third-party service that's done. It meets ASTM standards for ESA phase 1 assessments. They're very comprehensive. When I worked with another firm that did hazardous waste, we use them all the time for part of, the hazardous waste assessments. So using that as the due diligence. Then the sieve analysis. As we've discussed and is mentioned in the beach nourishment guide and in the underlying regulations that the guide uses, 314 CMR 907, the sieve analysis, if there's less than 10% fines, I meant to bring my 200 sieve just to show you how small that is. I left it in the back of my back seat this morning. So, but that's a very fine sieve if you've ever done soils work. If a site then has less than 10%, we would suggest then the due diligence is met, that less than 10% fines is met. It could be considered acceptable for use on the template. Scenario 2, the due diligence shows that it's unlikely to be contaminated. Basically, it's clean through that mapper, but the sieve analysis shows that it's 10%. Number one, the SBPF could then pursue chemical testing of that material. Number 2, they could reject it because it didn't meet both of those criteria. Number 3, just think about the options. It's likely to be contaminated based on the due diligence, and whether or not it passes the sieve analysis, then again, there's 2 options. 1, to do chemical testing. 2 would be to reject it. It's in talking with the representatives of SBPF, it's likely that if it didn't meet both, the mapper showing that it's likely to be clean, and 2, that it didn't meet the sieve analysis, they'd probably reject it. But, I think in terms of an overall policy or protocol, leaving that option for chemical testing in there is acceptable, and it meets the guidance and it meets the regulations. So that has to do with compatibility and contamination. The other part becomes the operational piece, which is what the debris issue comes to. It's, traditionally, sand from a commercial sand pit is considered clean. And it's, considered to be free of debris.
Excuse me, just traditionally, by what tradition?
Just that usually a sand pit is operating and digging out sand, that was native sand.
I guess my issue with talking about the sand pit though is we have a specific locations.
Well, but I want to just finish this so we can go over the operational piece. But sand sourced from other sites, sand sourced from commercial sites, if it was determined to be compatible, based on the mapper and the sieve analysis, we propose that then that material be screened. And the screening would remove the timbers, the brick, the block, the pipe, stuff like that, may be missed when it's being picked, because just so that, the picking doesn't, as we can see, doesn't get rid of everything. And then as is being continued, is being done now and to go forward, is after the sand is placed on the template, this template is inspected weekly as just part of the SBPF's protocol. And just as part of the weekly inspection to remove any observable debris on the template, and remove that from the site, so that if there's something that happens to get through or that's there, can be removed from the site. So what we've tried to address here is the discussions that we had last week relative to contamination and following the guidance. And number 2, some changes in the operation to avoid that material being, deposited at the site, and doing that operational piece as well as proactively going and removing that old building material stuff that's on the bluff, of the three potential sources, the two that SBPF has some control over are addressed. The third one of other contractors using that publicly available site, it leaves that as the potential source. So we're trying to address the two items that SBPF can address.
Unfortunately, even if it's another contractor that dumped contaminated material, it got spread throughout your template, so that's your operators. I mean, I just find this to be such an egregious violation of the clean fill condition. I mean, the sheer volume of debris, it was heartbreaking to me. I mean, I honestly couldn't believe it. So when we say social media pictures, I'm not looking at those. I took my own pictures only in front of the template, like strictly. I mean, I was horrified, truly. And then there's an operator up at the top. Nobody's picking any of this up, and more is falling onto the public beach. You know, I don't know where to go with that, but to say, oh, it might be these three sites, I mean, it got spread throughout your template.
Okay, I just, want to identify two things. Number one, I walked it today twice while they're working it. As we walked it, there was, we picked up a handful of things, but what I'm getting at.
I just want to say one more thing. What was also evident to me, more trucks of sand were actually dumped. So some of the things I might have seen on the surface were actually covered up by more deliveries. So it wouldn't surprise me if you see less.
Okay, but but the other thing is, as this goes, they also walk it, quote unquote, police it at the end of the day. I know, in talking with Mr. Feely, he was out there with Jeff, was it Thursday or Friday? Friday, because you had gone out Thursday. They were actively working it and, working it to recover the exposed tubes from the Tuesday storm, working to get that taken care of. And on Friday, they were recovered. And, at the end of the day, they also remove material from the template. So, there's the guys I saw, putting stuff in the bucket says they were working today, but at the end of the day, they also walk it and remove material. So I'm telling you, that's the practice that's going on. And
I think we can break it down to simply making sure we're getting sand from acceptable sites, making sure that sand is screened if and when needed, and making sure that at the site we're taking control to make sure that it's being picked as needed as well. Nobody wants to have debris at the site, and I think that these protocols and any other good ideas that you have and want to help implement will make sure that happens, both
and
sourcing, screening, and picking.
And there was one site that
to start the pit. I mean, honestly, like when the machine operator's there and he's dumping it, the truck, the truck driver should be sitting there watching what's coming out of the bucket. You see something, stop it. Get in the truck, throw it out.
Right.
Then when it gets dumped, see it again. Then when it gets down the site. End of the day, no, it should be as the guy rolls along and he sees something, stop, get it out, get it off. That's you guys have to start this right from the get-go.
I will tell you, in talking with them, that's what's happening now. Was it happening September? I can't answer that, but I can tell you that that's the practice now. There was one site that I know was brought up last month, and that's probably the source of most of the gray material that people are identifying, and that's the borrow pit at the Spearhead site.
Which we have significant testing of.
Correct, and because I know, I forget the commenter's name last month who brought up, some of the comments about the fines that were from and I responded to that were from the geotech borings at that site were above the 10%, and that's the site that I mentioned. Because of that site, we had more extensive testing done on that site to examined soils at 4 locations, 4 pits across the site at elevate between the surface and 5 feet below grade and 5 to 10 feet below grade. And those were sent to Peter Rosen, those 8 samples, and then part of each of those 8 samples was composited for another composite. So there was 9 samples at that site. That site, the materials, the grain size came back that it was compatible. The color and of that material is gray, and I think that's potentially the site where some of this material has come from that has been tried to get picked out, and where a screening process would have removed all that. So that's why we've is proposing to use a screening process going forward, a commercial screener where it gets essentially sifted through the commercial screener.
It's a 1-inch screen, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, that big.
I appreciate what SPPF is saying in terms of wanting to move forward with this better practices for mitigation sand in the future. But I do think that we're missing a level of specificity in the technical language that the order of conditions actually says. In general condition number 7, it says any fill used in connection with this project shall be clean fill. And then it talks about what doesn't qualify as clean fill. And both Mr. Dunk and Mr. Cohen are saying that it's highly likely that at least some of the fill that's on the template right now that is classified as unclean is coming from SPPF. It might be 1/3 of it. It might be more than 1/3. But it's definitely not qualifying as none. It says any fill. We need from the beginning of this permit, from the date the order of conditions was issued to the date it expires, that all the fill be clean. And I think categorically we're seeing that it's not the case.
And as Commissioner Golding has mentioned, that we've delivered over 100,000 cubic yards. And there's been some discussions about color in the past and things like that. SBPF is working to comply with the order, really working hard to comply with the order. We acknowledge that there has been this material that appears to have not met that standard. And we're working, as we have said, working to try to avoid that from the 2 sources, and that SBPF can have some control over. And so that so we don't, so that we're meeting that standard. I think we've generally met it up until very recently, and the material that was being placed today was a very clean, uniform sand. I forget which source it was, but it was obviously it was one that went through the Sieve Analysis and was determined to be compatible on grain size and on visual. Also, digging into it with my hands and checking it was, looked like a native sand that was probably from a clean excavation.
So Dwight, I'm not sure why you brought my name up there.
Because you had mentioned that until March of 2018. That's what I'm saying is that I agree with your statement that, and I think it was even beyond March of 2018. But what I'm getting at is the SBPF has been doing this for a long time, for 6 years. They've been working hard to try to meet all of the conditions, continue to work hard, understand that, we've had the meeting last month, in trying to change some of these operational procedures to refine certainly condition number 25, which is talking about compatible. That's a very short, broad condition, And what we're trying to do is propose methods for compatibility and operation so that it's clearer to how to achieve compliance with those two conditions.
So I
More
have-
specificity
I
to
have
those
two
conditions.
comments that I'd like to make. And the first is from what, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're saying that you do not have complete control over the delivery site. So my reaction is fine, shut it down until you do. In other words, I don't like this going forward, well, if there's more debris or if something isn't compatible, that it's not your responsibility because other people are using the delivery site. And that didn't seem to be an issue until recently, so I don't understand why this is taking place. The other thing is, you said that land-based sand should have a different standard to sea dredge sand.
No, I didn't say a different standard. What I said is we need to take that guidance that's developed for dredged material, use that as the framework for using that as the framework for when it's applied to land-based sand. We
But our
can't.
framework, from our point of view, it's compatible with the bluff, period.
Correct. Well,
And the beach.
The condition would be
Thank you.
bluff and beach. The guidance is for beach nourishment. That's for projects where you pump dredged material up onto the beach to rebuild the beach. So that's specifically to be compatible with the beach. It specifically talks about getting dredged material from the near shore right in front of or very close to the beach being nourished. So there are elements of that guide that are not applicable to this type of approach. However, the framework of due diligence, physical testing, chemical testing as needed is a proper framework from which to modify that for the use for this purpose.
Wouldn't you, from our point of view, isn't it reasonable for us to say that until you have complete control over the delivery area, that there should be no more sand delivered, no more compatible material delivered until you have complete control? Because you're arguing that part of the reason why there's debris there is because you don't have complete control.
The access point is accessible off of a public road. The SBPF can't control people using the road. Hoyks Hollow delivery point is a publicly accessible beach access point which contractors use, and that was the June site where the June material was delivered. So I think for SBPF to control the publicly accessible
Baxter Road
areas.
is public.
Correct.
But where your delivery, isn't that on private property where that actual delivery dirt road is?
And it's controlled by a chain that can be
So I think maybe I
Accessed.
understand what you're getting at, and this is what I would have done for my project. You start seeing all this debris, pump the freaking brakes. Don't continue to dump material until you can figure out that source of contamination. I think that is some of what you're saying. Maybe you can't get complete control, but you can figure out where this contamination is coming from. And if it is coming from that delivery point, then we got to figure out a way around it. So, yeah.
It is.
And I also have a question because we're talking about due diligence and the beach nourishment guidelines. And we asked the last meeting about some of the sources. And your contractor said that the due diligence was done, they didn't need extra levels of testing, and then we get information submitted that one of these sites is a former leach field and septic area.
that site. It was a property for a parcel that had a septic system, that had that had excavation. The material that was from the septic field was not accepted by the SBPF and was not used on the template.
How do we know? You know what I mean? Like for the due diligence to be truly there for us to see, there needs to be evidence that this is the exact location we excavated from.
Right. And that's certainly information that could be provided at any future filing, along with the Sieve Analysis, evidence of protocols that were implemented to make sure that the sand was not just compatible but also clean. I think that it's prudent of you to require it as a general policy for all sand delivery, and SBPF intends to voluntarily comply with that until you issue those guidelines generally. I don't know whether or how much of the problem was caused by SBPF. None of us do. I mean, obviously none of us are there, but it's not, I can't tell you that, we've identified that there was some kind of one-time problem that it'll never happen again. All I could tell you is it's an easily preventable problem with putting protocols into place before. I think we were taking actions that were deemed to be reasonable ways to determine if the sand was clean, and that those are not cutting it because there's debris that shouldn't be there, regardless of whether it's coming from the site, regardless the sand site, regardless of whether it's coming from the bluff itself, or regardless of whether it's coming from sort of drift and wave energy or whatever. There's clearly reasonable things that can be done to prevent all of those. And SBPF is already doing them and intends to implement voluntary policies,
So
and
guys,
encourages you to have a general policy.
I totally appreciate the future prevention and what's in this letter.
Yeah.
I think unfortunately, with the amount of debris that's come forward in the last 10 days, we're looking at remediation of the project area. As the chair, we're a little bit beyond just Sieve Analysis.
For me, there's two separate issues at hand here. There's ameliorating and remediating the current issue on the template right now, and then there's planning for the future. I wasn't on the commission when the order of conditions was written, but I can see it would have been great to have things in like the GPS coordinates of all sand need to be delivered. There needs to be physical, chemical, and biological testing. I understand that. It's not in the order, so we're working off what we have right now. But I look forward to planning for the future when additional projects come up. But right now, we need to focus the discussion on the potential violation that has occurred here.
Well, so if you
Excuse me for a minute, Steve.
No, go ahead.
Because I wanted to also add, you mentioned, we all know this project's been going on for a long time. So let's say 6 years, you mentioned 6 years. And Ian, you mentioned, so just looking back, let's say it was okay until 2013. I'm not admitting that or anything, but just say for argument's sake. But that means, 2018. And so we're about to 2020. And so if we've got 6 years, we have almost 2 years of the 6 years where, we're concerned about there having been violations. So that's not, a small matter. And also, ongoing, I believe it's your responsibility, SBPF's responsibility as the applicant, to make sure that only clean sand show up on those templates and on the town beach, which we all own. And so, and I do not feel confident that, that has been done. I think we have, unfortunately, all too many pieces of data that it hasn't been done. And, it's great that your guys do their job when you're there. But, when you've been there, Seth, if they're not being watched, what is happening? And then we see the evidence of this debris down there where, this is supposed to be a walkable beach. This is supposed to continue to be an asset for the whole island. And I think the lack of attention is the kindest way I can put this, to really making sure and taking responsibility for what you agreed to do is where I think we all are extremely concerned. And I share I share my fellow members' concern
So
completely.
we SPPF does not, SPPF also shares that concern. And if you want to come up with some actions that can be taken to make sure not only that the sand is clean going forward, but also that the site is remediated, that does not sound unreasonable. I don't propose that I would tell you what that means exactly right now. I think we'd have to go back and figure out how to properly do that without disturbing the bank, without disturbing the geotubes, but
Disturbing the beach.
the beach, right? But I'm sure that there are reasonable actions that can be taken to make sure that any debris that's existing is removed within some reasonable way of doing it without causing other problems.
And then unfortunately, if it is, needs to be removed, you guys caused the other problems. Like we need to own that. If you're the ones who damaged the template, requiring some sort of remediation, the damage is on you guys. As the,
No,
I mean, they agreed. I mean, it's in your agreement, and that's what
Yeah,
we need to hold you to.
and we
That's
could-
our job here.
we could figure out how to make that happen to make sure that we're not damaging the geotubes and not damaging the bluff itself, but removing debris to the fullest extent possible.
thank you. I appreciate you guys saying that. I'm going to open it up to the public. We don't have any more questions for that.
Just one more thing, I just think because that debris is on the bank, we can't see it. I'd rather see like every other day. If there's a rain event, I want someone out there kind of walking it after it's done. I mean, we're going to see more debris be exposed, and so not the weekly. I'd like to see it more
Well,
frequently.
certainly when the template is being worked on, it's usually for several days at a time, and it can be done on a daily basis.
Okay.
When the template has been left, when there's no maintenance, no repair, it's weekly. It's also after every storm event because.
Well, even a rain event, I mean, it's going to move.
Right,
there.
right. But with rain events, there's usually wind too, and potential for increased waves. So after storms, there is an inspection mainly for uncovered geotubes, but that can be added in terms, and they have been looking for debris too, but that can be added to.
We can
that.
formalize that for sure, and I think that it's appropriate and manageable.
So, as I open this up to the public, I want to remind everybody to please not repeat what other people have already said. Also, remember, we are here to uphold the Wetlands Protection Act, so your statement should be based on that act.
And introduce yourself.
And you have to speak directly into the microphone.
Introduce who you are.
Feel free to sit at the mics.
Yes. Yep. Audience, you need to be quiet too. Yeah, audience, quiet.
I have, oops, is this on?
Introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, Yvonne Valancourt. I'm the director of the Nantucket Field Station.
Could you speak up a little bit, please?
Okay, is this not on or?
Only goes to the audio video.
Okay, so can you hear me if I speak?
Great.
Yeah, okay. So my name's Yvonne, and I won't be long, but I have concerns about potential septic contamination. If that is, so I wrote this. I'll read it. Having attended the last meeting and following the photos and personal accounts of the fill being dumped at the geotube project, it's clear from those photos it would seem clear that it is not clean fill as described in the conditions, and it is not from an undisturbed pit on the island, which is what I understood to be the assumption of clean fill that they were going to be delivering from. Photos and personal accounts have documented the large, easily seen debris within truckloads dumped on the bluff. This violates the conditions of the project. This is not compatible with the beach conditions. There are no bricks. I mean, you do see bricks and debris, so kind of take that sentence outside of what you see coming out of the bluff. You don't see quantities in that amount, just appearing. And so it would seem that this large amount that appears on the template isn't replicated in other areas to that extent. So I think that's worth noting. But my real point in saying all this is that if this was assumed to be clean fill, and it was delivered this way, or in part delivered this way, what else is there? And that's what concerns me is you might be able to filter the debris, but you can't filter out the microbes. And microbes and bacteria, mold, things like that do persist in sand. And so if they are brought from what was thought to be a clean environment, or a clean sand, clean fill environment, but is not, then they won't be sieved out. And so that's my concern.
Question for you based on that concern. So could microbes like that lead to an algal bloom?
I don't know. They could lead to persistence of themselves. So if it's from septic, contamination, E. coli, things that could make you sick, staph, I could go on and on. But those are things you wouldn't want persisting in the beach. And if you look at scientific literature, they do persist. So in the last meeting, or in one of the documents in the packet that we can read, someone stated that, it was, if we leave it out in the sun in a pile, it will kill some things. I'm abbreviating whatever it was I read. I apologize for not having that citation, but that's not really true. You go down a few inches, and as a biologist, if you read the literature, you'll find that microbes do persist on the beach pretty well. So if you're introducing more from a source that is septic, that really bothers me to think about. And so you wouldn't want to sit on that beach. All right, not to be alarmist. It's, but I'm saying if you know where it's coming from, and I can leave this.
Yeah, with Jeff.
That would be good.
So my point, and I can't linger because I have to go set up a talk, is if my point in saying all this is if the assumption was that it was clean fill, and they're finding that their source wasn't what they thought it was, then there are other concerns. And I do think they should test. And so I'm happy to hear that there's this testing protocol being thought of for the future. But right now, I have concerns that there may be microbes and there may be other things. To say we're not industrial is true in the sense that we're not industrial here like other places. I apologize. But flame retardants are used on the island. We all have oil. There could be things that you would just want to test for, and I think it's fair to ask for that. Thank you.
And I would just like to make a comment about what Yvonne said about the microbes, because on a beach, kids roll around on the beach, dogs roll around on the beach. We don't have to, algal bloom. It's simply if you've got the sand that you sit on and wind up, perhaps ingesting accidentally or what have you. Because I think we need to be clear, we need to be sure that our beaches are clean for us all to use. So I'm really glad she raised that issue.
Can I make just one comment about the brick issue in specific? I meant to say this earlier, but apart from being physically different than the native sediment found in the bank and the beach, the alkalinity of brick is very high. And if that material is breaking down and washing out into the ocean just beyond the beach, it could potentially cause a lot of problems with the pH of the nearshore area. And that's something we need to be concerned about. Additionally, most bricks are just clay that you put into a mold and you fire. But some bricks, depending on the type of application that they were used for, are actually coated in creosote to make them waterproof. And if we have things like that leaching down the bluff, that's a well-known toxic chemical. So we need the burden of proof is on the permit holder to show us that these things aren't there, but we need to be concerned about them for sure.
Ashley, I just have another question. I noticed the representatives from the SB. Here they are. Okay. Good. I just wanted, you all left as soon as the.
No, we didn't leave,
pub-
yeah.
Well, no, I mean, you left the room, so you aren't participating, so we want to make sure, no, I want to make sure they were going to be attending the rest of the meeting. Okay.
Okay, members of the public, comments, concerns, questions?
Okay, I'm gathering that this doesn't pick up my voice, but.
Please state.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, my name is Catherine Murphy. I live in Sconset, and I'm probably not addressing the law that you have to uphold, but I heard you list anecdotal evidence, and I heard the chair list anecdotal evidence. I walk that beach probably once a week with my dog, not as frequently as Mr. Belkind. I have seen debris being picked up. And I also belong to the rather geeky sounding Sconset clean team. And we start several times a summer in Codfish Park, go all the way down to the lighthouse. When we get to where the geotubes are, there has been little, if anything, for us to pick up there in terms of trash or not belonging. And that's it.
Thank you. So again, I want to remind everybody, Wetlands Protection Act, and our standards. Okay, leave the anecdotal evidence, please. All right, members of the public, any questions or comments?
Deanna Atherton, Nantucket Coastal Conservancy. At the meeting on November 29th, you addressed Special Condition 27, and you voted and found that SBPF had met the failure criteria in regard to Special Condition 27. We submitted a letter with documentation. We believe they are in failure also of Special Condition 28. And I know that's not on the agenda for tonight, but perhaps we can take that up next week. Tonight, what we are addressing is General Condition 7. General Condition 7 is a boilerplate condition that appears in every order of conditions, and I will read it. Any fill used in connection with this project shall be clean fill. Any fill should contain no trash, refuse, rubbish, or debris, including but not limited to lumber, bricks, plaster, wire, lathe. Is it lath? Lathe. Cardboard, pipe, tires, ashes, refrigerators, motor vehicles, or parts of any foregoing. This is Basic Wetland Protection Act 101. In Mr. Carlson's memorandum of his site inspection, he ends with this sentence. Based on the December 4th, 2019 inspection, I have significant concerns that this material meets these criteria as recorded by the concerns about whether this material meets these criteria as required by the order of conditions. I respectfully suggest that you need to consider whether this applicant has met the failure condition for condition number 7 before proceeding, and that becomes part of the record. It sounds to me from the testimony this evening that they are conceding that they are responsible for providing in part some fill which is not clean. Once you come to that finding, then we can move forward and figure out what to do next. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions from the public?
RJ Turcott, Nantucket Land Council. SBPF has tangibly failed to uphold part of the order of conditions, so we are simply looking to the commission for tangible enforcement action. Regardless of how all of these things got onto the template, as Commissioner Golding said at the very beginning, the template is fully their responsibility. So we're looking to the commission for tangible enforcement action. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions from the public? Jeff, what do you recommend?
Sure. So it needs to be, just as a reminder, George is on the phone as well if we have questions of him for a little bit longer here. As much as I think it's true, I think the first step, and I think Deanne said it well, is if we've been really looking at this general condition number 7 first, and very much like we did last time. I think maintaining that same procedure for having a discussion and then making that finding of whether the commission feels that you're not in compliance with that condition or you are in compliance is the first step. And then obviously, if you find that there's non-compliance with it, it's, you're compelled by the Wetlands Protection Act and the town bylaw to take action to bring into compliance. So I think that's the first step, and then where that goes from there, I think it's kind of part 1 and then part 2.
Well, I know, based on my inspection and your site, clearly, met failure criteria under condition 7.
Can I make a point? So condition 7 isn't specifically called out as one of the failure criteria. I think it would be better to say that the project is not in compliance with general condition number 7, because they're separate conditions within.
So they are, in my opinion, not in compliance with condition number 7.
I move to find that SPPF is not in condition with general condition, is not in compliance with general condition number 7 in the existing amended order of conditions.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously.
So now, just to kind of further on, so now that you've made that finding, we'll obviously memorialize that in some sort of document. Our procedure last time was to issue out the proper DEP form. With that finding, I think now discussing what remedial action needs to be taken to ensure compliance through the enforcement action with that condition, the step that you'd be taking now.
So Jeff, or perhaps this is a question for George. Under the failure conditions, under item 34, would you argue that 34A, failure to provide the sand mitigation is required herein, is clearly, would that apply?
Can I answer that, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and members of the commission. Ian, good to be with you this afternoon. Sorry under these circumstances. In response to Ian's question about 34A, that tends to imply otherwise the failure to provide the sand mitigation as required here, and really I think goes more to the schedule for the template and the mitigation as they go on. However, having said that, I don't think you need to find that this condition meets a failure criteria to issue an enforcement order. I mean, under general condition 7, that was cited by Deanne, it raises an enforcement issue. You have a violation based on your vote just then and your finding, and clearly based on Jeff's photographs. I haven't walked the beach. I'm not down there today, but I saw on Jeff's photographs. The situation is pretty egregious. As even a layperson like I can look at the photos that Jeff took, and there's no reason for anyone to believe that, in the 6 years that this project has been ongoing, Jeff is out there taking photographs of extraneous material. So the timing is very weird, and Jeff's photographs show an egregious violation in terms of the compatibility of what's being dumped on that, the GA2 structure. So you have a violation of General Condition 7, which presents an enforcement issue. And then there are other conditions at issue, and I know you don't have a detailed multi-page sand compatibility standard set forth, but you also have in your special conditions number 25, all sand used for mitigation or to fill and cover the geotube shall be imported from an off-site source and shall be compatible with the existing bank and beach settlements. And obviously pictures that show pieces of brick and PVC pipe and all that type of stuff is not compatible, as set forth in paragraph 25. And another condition you have is 52. A list of all sand sources currently being used shall be provided to the commission. Assuming that they've provided that, it goes on to read, should an additional source be added or changed, a sieve analysis demonstrating compatible material shall be provided to the commission for review and approval prior to the installation of any materials. So based on what was being, dumped there before and what Jeff took photos of, it's obvious that this is either a different sand source or, wherever that source is, they're providing different types of materials in there to be transported over to that beach. So it raises another concern about, providing some type of, proof to the commission of what's being dumped there. Now, the condition that you have found now, raises the issue about an enforcement order. And the concern is, and somebody raised it, you don't have current, testing requirements under your existing order. However, you do have conditions that talk about it being clean, quote unquote, built. So if you have reason to believe that, the stuff being dumped there is not compatible with the existing settlement, and you have reason to be concerned that quote unquote clean fill is not being provided there, then you certainly have a reasonable basis to require some type of testing involved in remediating this condition. So in my opinion, based on what you've got before you, you would be within your jurisdiction to issue an enforcement order based on your finding, Jeff's letter and photographs, requiring a submission of a plan for removal and replacement, a time limit for submission of that plan for approval by you, a time limit on the date of completion for that remove and replace proposal. And then you also include a condition concerning testing to confirm that whatever left is on the beach after the removal has occurred be tested with some type of sufficient protocol and horizontal sampling to prove to you that what is being left there is clean before anything that is then dumped over the geotube to replace the prior material that's placed there. So that would be what I would recommend. The concern at this point too is you've got this non-compatible material there. So is there a question of it going onto the beach or going into the ocean? So what you want to do is have this enforcement order so that this remediation can take place as soon as possible. And, based on what's before you, I would think, it would be my opinion that you'd be within your jurisdiction and authority to order this type of enforcement.
And George, so that after listening to the testimony from Yvonne Vinecourt, the biologist who's head of the field station, to have microbial testing would be reasonable? And also, would it be reasonable to insist that they stop deliveries until further notice, until this is settled?
Yes, it is, because you don't want anything further being delivered over it, what you've got there, until that would take place. And again, you don't have existing testing requirements and protocols, as Yvonne had mentioned, but the fact that this incompatible material has now been delivered to the site, raises that issue, and it's reasonably related that you have a reasonable concern about, whether or not this material that's sitting on the beach, aside from the fact that it obviously has incompatible materials such as brick remnants, but that, the incompatibility of it raises a concern with you, a legitimate concern about, whether or not this material is clean. So some type of reasonable, testing is certainly rationally related to the enforcement issue, which is before you, in my opinion.
Thank you.
I'm not a specialist. I would put it really to, the people with competence to give you, recommended requirements for ensuring that this area is left clean before additional material gets put on it.
Thank you.
And I apologize, I have a hard stop at 5:30. I had another night meeting tonight that I had to leave for. I wasn't anticipating this meeting until Jeff told me it was coming on. So I've got a few more minutes to hang on the line.
Anybody have another question for George while we still have him? Thank you, George.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, George.
No more questions. Good night.
I do have a question, or
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to hang up.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a question.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon.
Or maybe it's just a hesitation about the. I think we all know that we don't want additional material to be delivered to the bank until we can verify that what is on the template right now is clean. But I think that the timeline for that needs to be sufficiently short, because if there's a storm in the period where this is happening, then we're going to cause more of an issue by having this uncovered coastal engineering structure feeling all the effects of the wave energy. The template is there. The geotubes are meant to be covered to protect against the erosion that is occurring from the storm. So if there's a storm in the time period where no new materials delivered, that could be potentially problematic if the structure remains in place.
Right, and I think then, they have criteria that can only be uncovered for, a certain number of days and recovered. So they will have a narrow window. Or
Yeah,
they'll
we'll have a
meet
lot of-
other failure criteria.
Yeah.
A lot of end scour, like damaging.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It needs to happen in a very quick timeline.
Agreed.
It is my feeling, given the condition of the template and what was falling onto the beach, that the majority of the sand delivered during these fall deliveries needs to be removed to ensure that it's clean. Test it before it's removed? Yeah, I guess you could take some soil tests. Given the physical debris, I just don't know how else you would get to it. I don't think that we can say, walk it once a week and pick up what's come out. I don't think that's an effective way to clean this up.
Yeah, and ideally you would see that those tests going into the horizontal profile of the bank, but it has to be done with a very high level of precision as well, because we don't want just random auger holes going into the structure and potentially damaging that as well.
Right.
So I think that we can suggest some protocols to you that would.
Yes, so sweet. I appreciate that. I'm going to wait till all the commissioners make their comments.
Sorry.
Well, I think we should have an independent third-party tester who tests for microbial and biological contamination at differing depths and as quickly as possible. And
I think the third party is a great idea.
Yeah, I'm because I'm struggling with how we frame this so we get what we need, and it's very clear whether it's we use GPS coordinates to say, this area has to, I mean, I'm just talking off the top of my head is I don't know how this would get done, but to have an expert provide us with some guidance about how exactly this, what we're looking for to be done. And so I'm just not sure how, because we want to be specific so these guys know what to do. And that's what I'm just struggling with. So how, I mean, I would go find an expert to for us to use in developing this.
Well, so I guess I would propose that, Jeff, of course, you're leaving on the 18th, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
So, before you pack. Okay, it's too late. No,
Yeah,
I know. It's just such a mess. But sorry. So, in terms of potential biological contamination, I would have thought I would like to propose that we ask Jeff to hire a third party and provide a protocol where we get a thorough understanding and also I think it's in your interest as to whether there's any biological contamination. And that would affect what might have to be removed. So I don't think it's in anybody's interest to have a wholesale removal if it's not necessary, despite what's taken place.
Even if there's big debris buried in there, just remove it as it falls out.
No, and I suppose you could have a side scan, LiDAR scan. No, seriously, to see what's down there and, and judge it accordingly.
Yeah, I can see the top. Yeah, if it had to be removed, but the side of the template, I can't see that being removed. That's why I was saying, do a visual inspection every other day.
Yeah.
Go out there, because it's going to fall out. It's going to be exposed. Grab it before it gets in the ocean. So, but then again, like what Ian's saying, is if we can discover it before, dig a smaller hole, remove the debris.
Yeah.
But if not, remove it all.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who has an understanding of soil testing, this site presents a soil testing nightmare. Generally, how you do a soil test is you have a horizontal area of land, dig an auger into that land, you pull the soil up, you sieve it, if you're going to test for biological or chemical, you do that. But in something where there's a built structure and continuous layers of sediment are being piled on top of that template, to get to the issue, we don't know when the incompatible material started being delivered. So we don't know how deep the issue goes. That you're going to need to use something like ground penetrating radar or augering into that template all the way to the depth. It's going to be, I don't know exactly what needs to be done, but we need to have sufficient proof that it was tested far enough in that it's not going.
I think that's what we're suggesting. Testing.
Yeah, I know. I'm just.
If I may interject some data that's available, is the
Can you talk a little closer to the microphone?
Yep, the bluff survey that was provided to you gives an elevation of the template before any of this material was placed. So there is a baseline elevation below which there has not been any previous identified issues. So there's a baseline above which is the material that would need to be tested. Number one. Number two, I think, as Commissioner Topham has mentioned, we're just thinking in terms of ways of just because remediation has a specific meaning in the haz waste world, but cleanup of this material, thinking of how a contractor might remove that large debris if testing shows that there's no contamination of the material, how to remove the debris. And I think we could, I have some thoughts, but I would rather talk to a contractor who actually drives the equipment and knows what equipment is available. But I think there's some ways that material, that equipment could be used to remove those those large items and then do those regular inspections until we get to a point that all those large items are removed. I would, like I said, I would like to talk with the people who run the equipment and know the equipment to identify a proposal of how to do that.
So your local equipment operators?
Well, I obviously in terms of knowing what equipment is available on Nantucket versus what equipment is available, elsewhere. But I would want to talk to a contractor who, an earthworking contractor who does this, who moves earth and knows what types of equipment is available. I've seen different types that I think might be suitable, but I'd want to talk with them.
So I think there are ways we can demonstrate to you that the debris has been identified and removed to the best of our ability immediately and in the short term, so that you don't feel that there's a bunch of debris sitting out there that's going to be constantly fed out into the ocean or onto the beach. No one wants that scenario. And we will put together suggestions for your review basically as soon as possible.
Well, I mean, I was thinking that for debris that's on the beach, Jeff, can we issue them a deadline for removal of that debris? I mean, I don't know that.
Well, I think we do that on a daily basis right now.
Absolutely. No, I mean, so just to kind of hop in and throw my 2 cents in the ring on this. I mean, I think there are kind of two issues that we're talking about related to clean, and I think they're handled a little bit differently. And I think part of what we're talking about makes some sense, and I think part of it needs some refinement. So I think talking about the potential chemical or biologic contamination of material, obviously we don't have the protocol in place, and typically what we do is put that burden onto the applicant to develop that protocol that then we can send to, we have third-party reviewers that do things. We can send to them to review and say, we believe this will adequately address the concern, or it won't, or we make these suggestions. But that's something that we typically require applicants to develop on their own, and then we simply review instead of doing the work for them. So I think that's different, and I think the time frame for that is a little bit more interesting than the other one. I think as far as the debris goes and the finding that you guys made related to condition 7 is something that can be addressed on a shorter time frame than developing a protocol and getting things tested and returned. I mean, some biological testing, you don't just send it off and get results in an hour and you go pick it up. Some of it takes some time. Some can take a significant amount. I mean, I think if you've found that there's a violation of the order, I mean, I think you have to take action enough to remedy that violation and prevent it from happening in the future. And if that's something that's inconvenient for everybody, that's the unfortunate job that you guys have to do. And the means and protocol to do it is something that you can also, require the applicant to do and put safeguards in the short term until that's developed. I mean, I'll be the first to agree with Dwight that this project probably has more information and data that's been collected than just about any other project that we see. So there's a lot of information to kind of start and reset from and move from, but I think you have to be sure that you're addressing the concerns sufficiently to abate the violation as quickly and completely as possible. And I know you have to give people adequate time too. I mean, so some of those things like developing a chemical testing program or biological testing program isn't something that you just walk into the office and sit down and 2 hours later you have it done, as it takes time. Having a protocol in place to remove all of the large debris or man-made materials that are within that template, you can develop that protocol pretty fast. I mean, it's not a lot of effort, but I think that's something that to issue out the enforcement and to give them guidance, you could run 2 separate time frames with an immediate way to address it, to say, we expect to see, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but just as an example, we expect to see a protocol for removal of all large debris in our hands within 48 hours, 96 hours for us to review and adopt what that's going to be to address that going forward. And we expect to see the testing program for the biological and chemical concerns within a week for us to review, and that testing program could be underway and completed within X amount of days after seeing what that is. So they can run together, but I think what you need to do at the end of the day here is give them clear instructions for what you want back to remedy the violation. And if it's more review with some forms of action, I think that's, and I think what George said is that's entirely appropriate to do. If it means in spots where there's concentrations of debris, complete removal of material and storing it off-site to be tested and then able to be returned upon clean testing and removal of debris, that's fine too. I mean, it's totally up to you guys for how you want to do it, but your role is to abate the violation and uphold the terms of the order of conditions.
I mean, I agree that protocol for removing the large debris, it shouldn't take a lot of time to figure that out. How do you guys feel about a 48-hour deadline on a protocol to remove debris?
Well, it's weather permitting. I mean,
No, just a
A
protocol.
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 Just
right, yeah.
some
Sorry, just thinking
Friday.
form how they're going to do it.
Okay.
Right.
So I would say if that's the deadline for that, I think it would probably behoove us all if they could get that to you guys for review by the close of business Friday, that maybe in lieu of regular field viewings, we schedule a second meeting to review that specific protocol and have you guys accept or refine that further, just to make sure that it's adopted as part of the public process.
So we'll go with that.
Instead of
regular
meetings,
field
we'll have
meetings.
another meeting. Yeah, that's a good idea.
So we'll get it to you for Friday, and then you'll discuss it on Monday.
And then a protocol for the other sediment testing, chemical, biological, how they might scan the template by like next Wednesday's meeting.
That's a good question. I mean, I haven't put one.
Well, just an update, see how far they can get.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
pretty good. That's a good.
We
yeah. I
can
think
try.
it's.
To contact whoever might be doing the
Well,
testing.
get some idea.
Yeah.
I think the reality of this is there is local specificity about what's going to need to be done, but a lot of these protocols already exist. There are wide-ranging protocols about chemical soil tests, biological soil tests. You cut and paste some of them together and make it work for the local site we have, and then we can review it. I think a week is fine for something like that.
I mean, we'd find if they called Jeff in the office and say, we can do it on this day before a meeting. I mean, to get ahead of it. If they want to take a sample, then go take the sample. I'm fine with Jeff viewing it or
Well,
coming back to us.
we're talking about multiple samples.
No, I know, but I mean, if they have someone that can come early before the meeting,
And I think we need to, unfortunately, it has to come before us
Yeah.
to approve that protocol before the testing is done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
we would have
Okay,
to review
sorry.
it. Yeah.
No, it's just one thing. Staff approval is great for things like, permanent markers to delineate your 25-foot buffer zone in the yard. But I think something as a result from an enforcement action, I guess in my opinion, is something that should always come in front of the board for.
all right, that's fine.
Unless it's something that's simple enough and designated that can be done, but I feel like review of a testing protocol to address a concern that you guys have found would require board approval.
Yeah.
So if we're going to talk about this on next Wednesday at 5 p.m., when are we going to get that?
Well, Seth, you said that you're familiar with these protocols. What do you think is a reasonable timeline?
I mean, I don't want to state anything specifically because I would need to look more into what's available, but I do know that a lot of these protocols already exist, and some of it's just going to have to be adapting it for the specific type of project and area that we're in. But I understand that people have full-time jobs that require work. So, I mean, I think a draft can be done by like next Tuesday, and we don't have to, or next Wednesday morning even. We don't have it to be the final, but.
Can I just comment that the type of firm that would probably do this would be a licensed site professional. My firm doesn't do MCP work. We don't have an LSP. In terms of identifying getting a firm that could do that, we want the properly credentialed person to do that.
That's not here.
And that's not my firm, but it doesn't mean there are plenty of firms around, but it just means contacting one of those firms to get them on board to do that.
Yeah, it takes time.
And it takes a little bit of time.
So who would be responsible for contacting? That's the
It's
you. Okay.
They're setting up their whole protocol, they'll bring that to us for review on Wednesday. And it might have, we might have questions, et cetera, it might not go into place right away.
Well, what David might do is you should also be sure you're leaving not only adequate time for you guys to review, but obviously we're a public process, so making sure that there's also time for the public to review as well. It's something that's we've always held to be critically important to our process. So, getting the protocol, and it's great that you guys are willing to sit down at the table at 2 p.m. and crush through it and read it and understand it, but we're a public entity and making sure that the folks that are here and attending have the chance to review it at the same time is something that's always been important to the commission. That's where our whole submission on Friday before the meeting has come from, is making sure that people have adequate time to review in case they do have comments or questions.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate the point that you made, Seth, that we're stopping future deliveries now, and Mother Nature is not predictable. So not that anyone wants to delay this anyway, but we need to get this stuff done so we can have deliveries available again as soon as possible, given, we might wind up with a storm and then we have a hard armoring thing until it gets covered again. So.
With that point, I think as we talked about a little bit earlier, if you go out to the site, the material that's been going out there recently is clean. Is natural, native looking sand. In terms of trying to keep the tubes covered if they get exposed, that top layer of material is that native looking material. So in trying to balance, keep, recovering tubes if they become exposed, while concurrently trying to implement this type of a program, there is, I think, the top layer of material on the template would be suitable for recovering the tubes if it was needed, and with that, one of the immediate action items, I think, in agreeing with Mr. Topham of having that type of daily inspection and removal of not just debris but boulders and stuff like that, so that material is being removed while this larger effort gets reviewed, approved, and implemented. But I think, we're in a balancing act of trying to keep those tubes covered and recovering them after a storm, which I think there's that clean layer of material that's out there.
Do you have an operator who's skilled enough to actually just skim the top layer off? Because usually it just kind of gets pushed down and almost the middle gets pushed out first. So
if you go out there, you'll see how they kind of operate as they fill, as they place the material. There's basically kind of two windrows, one at the very top seaward edge of the template and one at the landward edge of the template. It does two things. It helps create kind of a corridor that allows the material to be pushed out as it goes out and stays in the center of the template. Number two, that seaward windrow then becomes the area that you can take the blade and push that to recover. And that's a light brown sand material right now, that windrow. So that's why I'm saying I think there's material out there to remain in compliance with the condition to recover and with that kind of visual observation, so we can balance keeping those things covered and getting this type of a program implemented and, approved and implemented.
And we will have to be quick with getting the protocol in place, because any questionable contamination, we do not want to getting pushed onto the beach to cover those tubes.
Yeah, and I don't know how we would do this, but I'm worried that some of that material already did get onto the beach.
I watched it on Saturday.
And so in the protocol, are we going to require that material? Well, there's two protocols. There's the physical protocol and the chemical biological protocol. Are we going to be requiring testing in the linear area of the beach and the nearshore environment as well, or just in the template?
We should probably test the nearshore environment and the beach in front as well.
Okay.
Because, like I said, I saw that material coming off the template on Saturday.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's
Me too, because that's where, we have more interaction with people and such.
Okay, we would provide both of those responses on the timeline. So in addition to on a daily or times per day basis, making sure that whatever's there is being removed, physically removed as it's exposed.
Okay, maybe, I think it's probably important to document what's being removed.
Mm-hmm.
The type of material, and maybe if it's going to the dump, the tonnage,
photographs and weight, yeah.
All right, so can I just walk through this? 'Cause if we're going to issue out an enforcement with instructions, I want to make sure that I have it all correct, because I'll correct the second page and we can sign the enforcement tonight to be issued. So we want a debris removal protocol by close of business on Friday that we will discuss at a meeting that we will post tomorrow for Monday at 4 p.m. All right, is everyone? All right. The meeting at 4 p.m. won't be in the enforcement. It'll just be the debris protocol. The second part is a chemical biologic protocol for the template, beach, and nearshore area.
Within at least a linear project, but I mean, yeah.
Well, I think you'd say that those three areas representative for the entire project area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How are you defining, beach is clear? What are you, how are you defining near shore?
I think we would say so instead of beach, I'll put from the base of the template to the mean high water mark.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. That's fine.
We're not making you
The
go up.
nearshore area will be mean.
I think
Yeah, we
near shore
can
is
do
maybe
mean to somewhere in there.
Intertidal zone.
And we wanted that for the meeting on 12/18. And then I'm hearing daily inspections. For debris. Removal. And documentation. For all to be removed. Those are the three things that we're looking for. I mean,
Also
We wanna add
discuss,
in-
was it?
well, the cease and desist
moratorium.
will be built in, so, and then a cease and desist in all of the work.
Formal notification to DEP.
So DEP, anytime we issue out, this is why we use the form, is we're obligated to provide them a full copy of the enforcement action to DEP. So like the last one we did, we have to send it by certified mail and we send it by email, so they are required to get it.
Do you want to put specifically within documentation that we want photographs taken as well? Just be specific about that.
Sure. And then a cease and desist for all other activities until this results in the commission's satisfaction. So this also doesn't preclude you from, like I said later, if you guys develop it and put it forward, you can adopt those protocols as part of this. And you can always, it's an open enforcement, so if you need to add, you can. So.
The chemical testing came back, the biological testing came back.
I would assume that in whatever protocol is developed, that if something came back as not meeting the standards that are set, that material would be automatically designated for removal. So it doesn't pass.
Yeah, it needs to.
It needs to leave. If it's okay, then it can. I think that's the whole point of it, is to say, if there's a portion that doesn't pass, or the standards that are set, then it's gotta go.
So you're going to issue that tomorrow morning?
You will see me bright and early. What time do you guys open?
8.
7:45, I'll be there.
Who bears the cost of testing the soil? Is that the town or?
No,
No, that is
permit holder.
Applicant.
So this is, hopefully we'll clear it up for all projects, is the commission has the ability through both the act and the bylaw, if there is additional review and testing required for any project, not just a project of this nature, whether it's single home construction or septic systems or coastal engineering structures, the commission has the legal right to request review to be funded within reason. So you can't just do something for funsies, but if you have a real reason to get that, and that's a cost that's always passed on to the applicant to do.
A motion to issue out this enforcement?
Yes, if someone will make a motion to issue the enforcement as conditioned.
Is there a motion to issue out the enforcement as conditioned? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you guys don't have to go through the rest of the stuff on the agenda, because I want to get out of here. I usually put it on there to give everyone an extra few minutes, just let the crowd clear a bit.
I'm trying to get to the TIC meeting at 6 o'clock.
You might
You can get there.
get there, there's no traffic.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any traffic, and I'm guessing there might be a couple of seats left, you know. Oh, Jack, can I borrow your pen? I put mine away.
Sorry, I gotta go to the board of select board. Or the select board. Hey, Joe, can you come back?
No, it's not over. Guys.
We're still in session, so if you could please take your conversations outside.
All right, everybody quiet down or leave.
Good to see you again.
That's a good teacher voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I didn't do the 1, 2, 3 eyes on me. Right, maybe next time. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So I just have one question. So there were other sites that were getting the sand, and I don't want to get into it, but later on I'd like to kind of address
So, well,
more of that later on.
while we were there is what this has prompted, and I will give you a little preview, is we have already started in the last week. We have gone out and physically inspected I would give you the list, but just really roughly, the area to the south here, all of the sites on Pocomo, all of the sites on Eel Point, the site at the end of Hinkley Lane, the one site at the end of the Starbrook Road. We have physically been on and photographed all of those in the last 7 days.
Okay.
So I'll put it all together in a report for you guys to see. A lot of times we just do it, but I knew that question was going to come up. So that was something that we just thought, as we try to do from time to time, just did kind of an overall audit on projects that require nourishment, and have a few left to finish up because there are a lot. We still have a few up in a harbor to catch up with, but just trying to get there for everybody and to see and kind of talk about material, or if there are other projects of concern, to bring those to your attention as well.
Thank you.
Have you noticed any concerns yet in the material?
There's one site that I did, I was looking to address. One of the other sites that was on the Inner Harbor is scheduled for their nourishment, and their work crew has not been able to make it on the island in the weather. And they actually contacted us to specifically ask if they could get the nourishment material on as close as they could to the start of the new year, because they were not able to come up today. So they're in communication with us about what's going on and delivery schedule. And it's not a site that's out of compliance, but they owe their the final installment of the yearly nourishment component. But they're not going to probably make it by December 31st. They'll probably make it by the 4th or 5th of January. They contacted us specifically to say, this is what's happening. So, but other than that, for the most part, everything is seeming nothing else.
All right. Now is there a motion to adjourn?
There is.
For a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks everyone for coming.